Hello, Culture Matters podcast. I'm so excited to introduce you to myself. But before I do that, here's a quote I picked just for this episode. To live is to suffer. To survive is to find some meaning in the suffering. Friedrich Nietzsche. I'm back today for part 3 of my dear friend Tony Capullo, the one, the only, to have an interview with our guest. Me, Tony.
Good morning, Jay. How are you?
I'm better than good, better than most.
Well, this is part 3, and you're such a compelling person, and you're so interesting, and this has been such an amazing ride with you that we started with what we thought would be 1 session, and now we're at 3 sessions. So kudos to you for keeping everybody's interest, and it's just been fascinating. So we started where we're going to go today. We started with some of your past, where your development. Then we're going to the culture matters, the meat and potatoes of what culture matters does. I want to start today by going forward. So we went backwards, we went to the back, went to the current. Now I want to go forward a little bit. And I'm going to start with the first question is, let's talk about today's culture. I keep hearing about the white culture, woke, broke culture, whatever it is. Okay, and the culture has changed since you've been in business. Where do you see things going from an overall culture standpoint right now, and why?
Conflict. There's conflict conflict is inevitable in innovation. Our general culture is asking questions, uncomfortable questions. How are we going to move forward? I think at the bottom, like as people, as a species, I think at the bottom of that, technology is creating a level of transparency that the fundamental beliefs that drive all of us, it's almost like we can see them on each other. And if your beliefs upset my beliefs, we could say that we're okay with how other people live. We could say that, we could tell that to ourselves. However, at a deeply human level, like, we're going into biology and how the brain works. When I walk down the street and I see your beliefs that contradict how I feel the world should be, is the certainty that I need as a person to get up in the morning and go to work and be a person, I'm going to have a physiological response when I walk down the street and I see something I don't agree with that challenges how I feel about who I am in this world, this very uncertain world. Anxiety is going to increase, stress, hormones. Essentially, I might act in a way that compromises who I think I am. And I think that's happening. Like when I'm challenged, my beliefs are challenged. I think that's happening at scale in our whole society, civilization. And I think it's a result of technological advancement.
You think the technological advancement was the impetus for all this change? I mean, I keep hearing about the woke culture and all this stuff, and you said conflict, and it's almost like we are in conflict all the time. I mean, you read things and you're like, wow, this is just so conflicting, right? I read, and I haven't heard the song, but a country singer put out a song, said "Not in this small town" or something like that. Right now, everybody's boycotting and all this, and it's such a weird thing, because when I was a kid back in the 20s, you just didn't have this, right? There was none of this. So you said a minute ago, you said when you walk down the street and you mentioned the way you think things should be. How do you think things should be? You're younger than I am, so you did not experience what I did growing up. You had a different life experience.
I hope for a world where we can have. I hope for a world where we can evolve in a meaningful way. That quote that I used coincidentally, I didn't know what you were going to ask today, but I think it actually applies on a level. To live is to suffer. To survive is to find some meaning in the suffering. To live is to suffer. It's painful just to be a person.
To live is to
It's just,
suffer. Let's talk about that for a second. To
yeah.
live is to suffer. To live is to suffer. And there's people that are listening that say, I disagree with that. I live a great life and I don't suffer. But
Well,
yeah. But everybody suffers in some capacity, right?
Yes, and even the person that tells themselves that is a very natural mechanism of psychology to, well, how could we not tell ourselves that, to go and perform, to produce, to gather food and get shelter and stay alive? And that's not to negate the arguably positive concept of, hey, my life is not suffering. However, we have, if one doesn't do the things that one has to do, whether that's start with that, let's say conceptually positive mindset and then go do something, well, life will be suffering fairly quickly. I don't have any food. I don't have any shelter. Like now there's an animal eating my kid. So,
can you read the second part of the quote again?
Yeah. So then it's, to live is to suffer. To survive is to find some meaning in the suffering.
That's a really good quote.
So the reason I brought that quote up, to answer your question, I hope that, and I don't think I'm alone in this, I think a lot of, like, the idea of the Enlightenment, at the bottom of it, that we have all these privileges, and people have throughout history wanted people to find some meaning in the suffering. That created opportunity for people that didn't have opportunity, whether they were slaves, whether they were unable to speak their mind for whatever reason, whether they were, we can go on and on. How many people haven't had the opportunity to be themselves in this world, or however they perceive themselves to be? So I hope that we can find some meaning in the future, in the suffering, and continue to evolve, prosperously. I don't think I hold the secret of how life, quote unquote, should be. However, or with that, I'll say that how we act and interact, this is a basis of culture matters, R&D in businesses. How we act and interact in our life, in our business, reveals what we believe, who we actually are, and what level of value we're creating in the world, in our business. So I want.
Okay, so this is really so in your work, in your culture work, when you're doing a project or you're helping someone with their culture, do you see the suffering in some capacity?
Oh, let's use an equity, right? Let's use a concern or a business.
Yeah.
We're talking about our culture and how hard it is for people to interact and have dialogue together, right?
Mm-hmm.
Think about how hard it is for like just a new person that comes into an organization to say what they think. If a new person comes into an organization, they may not have earned the ability through, let's say, tenure, loyalty, comfortability. They're an outsider to share their thoughts, feelings, and emotions. But the irony in that is the new person can see all the flaws. They're not yet acclimated into the culture. So they may have the most important views, useful views, innovative views, conflicting views. The innovation is in the conflict. It's in the criticism. It's in the judgment. It's in that interplay of, no, that's one way of doing it, and this is why it's wrong. So it's in the cultural speak in businesses, we want people to agree with us. That's the undertone. You got to find great people. What the undertone of that is, I can't handle conflict. I can't handle those that make me feel uncomfortable. I need people that are going to follow what I do, or what I say to do, rather. So,
Does the
that creates
external,
repression and undermines innovation is one piece that we can go in.
so does the, in your opinion, does the culture of the external world, well, let me ask you, I know it does. I want to ask you how. How does the culture of our country or the external world affect the culture of the internal organization?
Well,
Because people bring it in with them, right?
yeah, we it's hard.
And
How
then second part of the question, I'm sorry, second part of the question is, and then how do you, as the expert, handle that? Because they're bringing in, you know, their baggage, so to speak, right? They have this idea, they have these thoughts, right? And they bring them to work, affects how the company runs. So how do you,
well, so let me separate thoughts here.
Okay.
Firstly, implicitly, there's thoughts of how we could be doing things in business.
Mhm.
Employee, what's the value of someone to work for and with an organization? It's to execute upon ideas, the ideas of the organization. And because whomever is executing upon it has a petri dish of pros and cons to whatever the initiative is. Therefore, they have a level of insight that those in the ivory tower don't.
Mhm.
So there's value there. There's value in what they think and how they feel about a situation, because they have access to information that those at the top don't. And by the time the initiatives are brought out, there's new information, because it's like you have a plan and then you get smacked in the face. That adage,
Right.
You
Right.
had a
Yep.
plan and then you got punched in the face.
Yep.
So it's very important to have open feedback loops, meaning people feel safe, people feel empowered, and can be responsible to take action and to tell us where there's fires and when things could be better. And implicitly within the growth of an organization, that those feedback loops break down. So how we go about increasing those feedback loops is to work on the actual philosophy of the organization, starting with how the leadership of the organization, the operating principles, how they actually perceive business, what their level of business education even is, their own emotional maturity, and so on and so forth. We can get in the weeds of how, but ultimately so that's one piece, is people innately have the ability to problem solve, and they're hired to an organization to problem solve in varying all sorts of different contexts. To go back to the other part of your question about people bringing their personal life, maybe their personal feelings, emotions, philosophies into the workplace. Well, that's inevitable, based on how open and inclusive and honest and educated the equity is. They can help them with those. They can provide them resources for those things. Do they need to become their patriarch? At some level they already are. They're feeding their family and doing all these other things. That's a good question. And ultimately the question becomes, if our society keeps evolving on the level of connectedness, businesses are going to have to face things they never had to face, no matter what, as far as how involved they are in the people's lives that work with them and for them. That may not have been the case 50 years ago, based on technology and how culture operated. People were more compartmentalized, theoretically, in that. And I think that it's continued to get more and more and more and more transparency, connectedness rather, leads to more and more transparency, even if we haven't voted for that transparency. That's going to create more and more conflict, proportional to how in tune we are with our emotions and understanding of how we conceptualize the world today. So that's part of how I'd answer that. It's going to get more complicated.
I'm gonna go backwards just for a second, because I have a question. If you can, this goes, if you were not in the culture field, this is about you personally, what would you be doing?
I tried to do.
I have to ask that question because I can't, because now I mean, because I know you, right? Now I know you, but like, what, if you weren't doing this, what would you be doing?
It's funny. Okay. Well, I always tell, I've actually said this quite a bit, so I've got to explore it in my own psychological analysis. I always, say if I wasn't messed up, I wouldn't be doing this. I'd be a stockbroker, which is kind of funny because the cliche of the stockbroker is they're messed up. And there's no offense to stockbrokers, right? Some form of business. I wanted to be an astronomer when I was a kid.
Really?
I
Why is
wanted to
that?
own laundromats. So
Wait, what did you say? You wanted to own laundromats?
yeah, I wanted to be an astronomer, and then I wanted to own laundromats.
Why laundromats?
Well, Barbara used to take me to the
Tell
laundromat.
people who bought, for those who don't know, tell people who Barbara is, because they may not have heard.
Barbara's my mom, second mom. She saved me in a sense from, the statistics, right, of the people in foster care. They get, put to one family, the next, the next, the next. She decided to adopt me, and I became her son. And she's 84, I think, today. So we used to go to the laundromat. She was in her 50s when she adopted me. And I used to see this guy come in. He looked like ripped up and just young and successful. And she used to say, "That's the owner of the laundromat." And, I grew up at some level in the Tale of Two Cities, because for a big part of the beginning, first 8 years or so, I lived in the basement. It was a beautiful basement of a very affluent neighborhood in my aunt and uncle's home. And so my mother was not well off, and they helped. And so we lived in a sense, the Tale of Two Cities, right? The poor and the rich. And so I had multiple influences over me, and that created a level of, resentment and aspiration. So the laundromat, I think, is a symptom of growing up in kind of in the in-between, being a couple steps away from prosperity, and that psychology, and it within love, but within pain and struggle, at least, and not lack thereof. So we used to go to the laundromat, and I see this entrepreneur, and there was already that urge to want to be well off, because I looked up to my aunt, my uncle greatly, and who they were as people, and how they created success together. And so there was that owner of that laundromat that, my mother used to, because she's always, although she wasn't an entrepreneur or anything of that nature, she had generally always positive things to say about those that went out and strove. So I think that influenced the laundromats. I do not own any laundromats today. So young, it was the stars and the universe. It's fascinating to me, and entrepreneurship was an inevitability based on, in my mind, how I was raised and the environment that I was raised in. Yeah. So business was going to be it.
You said your uncle was wealthy.
Yeah, and still is. I mean, he's still
How did he earn? How did he make his wealth?
originally a mason, doing people's steps.
Really? In what city? Philadelphia?
Jersey.
Jersey.
And over time built houses with his hands and a few workers, and then built apartment complexes and bought assets and managed them, and still to this day doing that. And I don't have
really, he's still doing it.
Yeah, he's in his 80s.
Really?
Yeah, he's a worker, and
he does the work. That's amazing.
Yeah, I hope he works until he can't, for him.
Wow.
And his son, by and large, has taken over, a lot of, from my understanding, a lot of the responsibilities. And that was a huge influence. I would argue that the house that I live in today is almost an exact replica of the house that I was raised in until about 7.
Your house in Pembroke Pines?
Yes, sir. Like that house is almost an exact, the size, how it's laid out. I don't think that's a coincidence. It's not like I was trying to do that. I just think that some level our environment does shape who we become.
By the way, I do want to say this for people who are listening, because this, you talk about coincidence. Coincidence is you texting me, well, maybe 2 years ago, and telling me you're moving to Pembroke Pines, Florida, where I grew up. You didn't know that.
It's crazy.
And when I asked you where are you going to live, and you sent me the address, it happens to be in the same community I lived in, where my house was when I lived there. I mean, the odds of that happening, and you took that house sight unseen, so you had no idea that I lived in
No
that.
idea.
No idea. When you
It's a
said
wonderful
some city,
neighborhood.
you said Pembroke Pines, Florida. I'm like, Pembroke Pines, Florida. I grew up in Pembroke Pines, Florida, and that's just crazy, right? So, I want to. So I have.
But I want to say one more thing. I tried to become that entrepreneur in my life because I moved out at 18 and I just went for it from there. With whatever I thought would work, but I just, no matter what, I've always been who I am today to people and to those that like our client partners, to operating. I've always been who I've tried to do other things and just keep getting pulled back to being that teacher, that student, and that person of confidence to someone in a position of control, of power, of influence. And I think that's influenced by my upbringing as well, because to be just how I was raised, the dynamic that I had with my mother and how stubborn and like ultimately arrogant. I figured things out quickly and I knew what I wanted, and I generally got it. And that created other issues. But yeah, so that's, I'll put a bow on that and we can unpack more as we go. But
Yeah, so I want to ask you, this is a random question. So at the end of your career, they make a movie about your life. Who plays you in the movie?
This is like a Freudian thing. I should just say what came to my mind initially. And I thought Shrek.
Shrek.
I just don't want to lie. I just don't want to lie.
Wait a minute. Whoa, hold on a minute. Shrek.
Yeah.
The big green thing that.
Yeah.
Why actor, not character. But I do have to ask you why why Shrek?
Tony, you could be a psychoanalyst. You're so good at this.
No, I want to know why Shrek.
I think that's my self-image.
You're gonna have to explain this because this is.
And also, if you think about that character, now that I'm thinking about it, because that was my thought word picture that came in my head before I thought about it. So that's why I wanted to share it. I didn't want to omit it and then just repress it, because then it negates the value. Because then I could go say something else, right? Who I aspire to play me, but that wouldn't fully be true. That's only part of the truth. So the Shrek thing, I don't know why I said that, but if I'm thinking about the character, he was a hero. He was ugly. He knew it.
You're not ugly.
Well, thank you. I felt ugly in my life.
You're not green.
I felt unloved.
Is he green?
Yeah, he was an outsider. He was on his own. Yeah, he was green. I mean, who knows what the writers and producers of that movie were trying to say, but he was an outcast. He was an outlier. And I think I felt that, had I not, and why would I care so much about how people, if I'm being honest with myself and thinking out loud, what would be the impetus behind caring about people in the workplace, and even the tyrant, even the potential tyrant, rather, the operating principal, because it's, as they say, it's quote unquote lonely at the top. So yeah, that's my answer. I think I don't think Shrek will really play me. Hopefully I've evolved through that pain by then. But
let me backtrack for just a second, because great answer. But give me an actor who would play you.
Yeah.
That was a very interesting answer, by the way.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
It was a very interesting.
Yeah. God, I have so many parts of who I am. I want to say a bunch of them, but I guess you're making me choose one, huh? It's definitely not Cillian Murphy, right? Maybe because I'm saying it's not him, and that's what I'd want it to be. Dang, I don't know. Russell Brand.
That's
He
an
was that
interesting.
trick.
That's an interesting response.
Yeah, yeah. And well, part of what makes this tough is I haven't watched TV in a couple of years because I made a commitment to someone not to do that until we accomplished an outcome from a work.
Wait, all right, so go back to that for a second. You say you haven't watched TV in a couple of years. So I want to tell
It's
you,
almost a couple of years. I think it's a year and a half.
so I had a friend visit me when I lived in Vegas, and he said
Maybe
to
it's a
me,
year. Sorry, I have to really think that through. I don't want to say the wrong amount of time. It's been a significant amount of time to where I almost can't remember when. Go ahead. Sorry.
no, I had a friend visit me in Vegas one time, and he said to me, "Oh, have you ever seen?" I don't remember what TV show it was. No, he's like, "Oh, have you ever seen?" Da da. Like, no. And finally, he looked at me, and goes, "Like, do you live in a cave?" I'm like, I don't watch. I don't really watch. I mean, and if you said to me, "Hey, have you ever seen the show on Netflix?" I'd be like, "No, no, no." I mean, I have no idea what any of that is, right? And it almost makes you feel like that you're out of touch. But I'm not one, and I know you're not, to sit in front of a boob tube and go, "Okay, I'm going to binge watch this." And I'm not criticizing people who do, because I can understand how it happens, but it's just not who I am. I just don't have the time. I always feel like I make as much use of my time as I can. And as you know, like you, my time goes from very early in the morning until I just peter out at night. I go to bed probably about 9 o'clock, and then I'm dead and up at early. But I want to ask you, so this is a very important question for these interviews. For the people listening to this, what are the top 3 things you want them to take away that they can apply to their lives or to their business? Because everything's about a takeaway, right? I mean, it's been an amazing conversation, that's for sure. And now I'm never going to look at Shrek again the same way, but you know, so if Shrek plays you, Barney's going to play me, but that's besides the point. What are the top 3 takeaways that you want?
Is how you act in congruence or alignment reflective of who you think you are. And how to get that answer is to ask the people around you, like, what's my top attribute? What's something I should work on? That's number one. That alone could be fairly helpful to someone.
Okay, that's one.
By
the way, on that, before we go to the next one, you said to ask the people around you. Do you think that there's people that will hear that and say, "I don't want to ask the people around me because the fact of the matter is I don't really want to hear what it is"?
Okay, here, that's good. So they may not think that, and I fall into this category as well because I'm also a person. If I have some reason, like some rationalism that popped in my head for why that's not helpful or that's not something that I'll do right now, that could actually infer that I benefit from it. Like, meaning it's not like the likelihood that someone's thinking what you just said explicitly is lower than some real strong reason for maybe something I've said or you said on this that can be pinpointed to, like, these guys, they're good, they're cool, nice, but I don't know how helpful that is, or some rationalization. So just even in the response, and that was kind of going to lead to number 2 lesson or practical outcome is, the whole Shrek thing, right? That came to my mind. I didn't have to share it, but I chose to. I could have repressed it and said who I idealize as representing me. And that would have been partially true. It's not necessarily a lie. It's an omission of the Shrek. And I'm before the crowd. This is a public sphere. So it's another level of nakedness to share that. That's another practical thing. It's like, be aware of what you think about yourself that may not even be where it's thinking yet. Because I didn't, you know how things pop in your head. The answer really wasn't Shrek. That was just what came to me when you said it. So that, you know, there's that Jay, and then there's the other Jay that would say like, yeah, Jason Statham.
That would be a good one.
The idealized self, and then there's the self. Well, really, the self is an agglomeration of the idealized self and what is not conscious to the self, and something of that. I'm trying to figure that out still. So, but anyway, that's number 2. What were you going to say?
No, keep going. What's number 3?
Number 3 is that you have a lot of, myself, you, our listeners, we as people have a lot to offer to our loved ones, to ourselves, through how we relate to our loved ones, to our coworkers, to our clients, to our authorities. And if I tell my boss, for example, how I feel about them, I'm taking a great risk. I'm taking a great risk because they have power to convince others, themselves, others, and me that I'm negative. They have power to do that. They're in a position of authority. I could just be honest with the most pure intentions, like really trying to represent my love for them with the truth, what I see as the truth. And they have complete power over me. And so I would argue, if you're in that position listening to this, where you're an employee and you want to tell the truth and you're afraid because you could lose your job, because you could be called something you don't think you are, because if you do it, you'll be a better person, even if everything is taken from you. How you do it will reveal how quality of a person you are. It doesn't have to be in guttural cursing or violence. It can be just tactfully, openly. Some conversations are best one-on-one than before a group.
Right.
But that's number 3. It's like the dynamic of that's number 3.
Number 3. I also want to ask you, in our last session, you referred to your book. Can you tell us a little bit about your book and what it's about, when it's coming out, or when you?
Well, so there's the one that's been out for some time, 30 Days of Thought. You're not referring to.
No, I'm referring the next one.
The next book, I'm uncertain when it's coming out. My intention is to start it in October of 2023. And the idea is culture doesn't work. That's going to be the title. Culture doesn't work when. So each chapter is when, for example, the values are weaponized. Each chapter is explaining, it's going to go through when culture backfires. He said one of the ironies of working with external pundits on culture is oftentimes it doesn't work. It gets worse. So culture doesn't work. Example, I'll give you an example. One of the chapters. Culture doesn't work when the values are weaponized or used as shields. So let's say we work through our values, but we get clear on what our values are. And in our organization, our value is love. Like that's the word, and it has a significance, and it means we treat people the way we want to be treated. And let's say someone's not doing that to us. So we went through this whole exercise. We got clear, we don't feel that someone is doing that to us. We went through the exercise. We got clear on the values. Someone came in and helped us. How values are weaponized are we go and try to take that value and explain to the other person how they're not being in love, and for this reason, that reason, and may just completely ostracize the person. That's when they become a weapon.
30 days of thought.
Well, let me just finish. The idea is to live the values out. So if someone is not, in that case, living the value of love in your view, you have to act it out with them. Acting a value out versus talking about it and using it as a weapon or a shield. So that's going to be one of the chapters to explain that conundrum and what we can do to actually live our values in the workplace.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. 30 days of thought. What was the most interesting piece of feedback you got on that book?
One of the criticisms, which was a 1-star review, that it was, when I read it, I thought, oh, this is helpful. I really wasn't angry, defensive, which I was excited to read it and understand what I could learn. And the review was really just kind of embarrassing because they really kicked me pretty low in something that I would argue I agreed with them on, which was that I was like overly obsessed with Nietzsche and a bit wordy and so on and so forth, which I agreed with them. The value of that was, I do think that how they perceived the book and what they were potentially seeking to get out of it based on the review, I think we did a poor job, could have done a better job at explaining how to use the book. So I immediately thought through that, and then we improved how we explained the book and the marketing and so on. So that critical review, who had partial truth to it for sure, and it wasn't said in a tactful way whatsoever. I just worked through that and then looked for what would be helpful, and it actually helped us. It helped me, and because ultimately that book, 30 Days of Thought, is more of a process and a working guide than it is an actual book. So anyway, that was very helpful. And in a sense, that was, I'm trying to act out what I'm talking about when it comes to culture. You want to create culture, you have to suffer the consequences of other people existing and being. And so this person had a thought that of something I worked really hard on, and they were quite cruel, but they still were right about a bunch of things in my view.
Really?
Absolutely. Yeah, that was very helpful. And I just wish that it was like an account where I could talk to them and get more information, because it was more of like it was a well-written review, but it was hidden. So I couldn't find like who they were, or else I would have asked them more like about it, because I thought it was thoughtful, and they obviously had read some of the book. But I just don't think some of their arguments were clearly coming from a standpoint of potentially, not clearly, because I still haven't talked to them, but potentially they didn't know fully how to use it for their betterment, right? Is what I got from it. Even if that's not true, I got something from being open to the bad review. I actually read that to Brad. I never heard him laugh that hard in my life.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was a really fun moment for us, because he essentially has been trying to tell me that for years, what this person said, and I wasn't listening to him, because I don't listen to a lot of people, and which is the big paradox of this whole even just conversation, right? That I could be a bit wordy and so on and so forth, but I'm still learning how to express myself in a way that I can be understood and understand myself. So yeah, it was a funny moment when I read him that review. And why he laughed? He laughed, I believe, because he cares, and he's been trying to tell me, something that he thought would be helpful to me. And
Brad?
Yeah. It was a funny moment, but that's my
What for those who don't know, we're talking about Brad Lee of Lightspeed VT.
Yeah, someone special to both of us.
Yeah. And wow, that's interesting that that's the one thing that you say when I talk about reviews. But tell me about a great review. So I'm sure you got it.
To my knowledge, other than one that was more kind of neutral and didn't, highly reviewed by people that went through the process. I could speak of one person that has been on this show numerous times, who actually included 30 days of thought, their 30 days of thought, in a recent book that they published. The last chapter of their book are 30 days of their thoughts, of my thoughts.
Interesting.
The person's name is Christopher Vester, and yeah, they're a special person in my life. They heard me on Dropping Bombs 5 years ago, episode 72, and they had been introduced to me by some other people, and then followed, and they did the 30 days of thought. So they did for 30 days. They actually took 3 of the thoughts a day. So the book is a process. You pick a thought. There's 90 thoughts in the book. There's a page to write in the book your thoughts. So when you read my thought, the challenge is write your own thoughts in the book and film your own thoughts. It shows you how to film your thought and put it on social media. Dennis Yu, shout out to Dennis Yu, gave us like a blueprint to put in the book of how to do a quick video. And so you read a thought that I wrote in the book, you write your thoughts down, and then you film your thoughts and put it on social media. It's a process. And this person, Chris, did it. But everybody does it in their own way, because that's inevitable, right? Freedom. And they picked 3 thoughts a day, and they did it for 30 days, and they put it on their social media. And we have a very close relationship to this day. And they even put it in their book, a new book they just released called Answers from the Stairs. I recommend people buying it. Answers from the Stairs. And
Answer from the Stairs. Tell who wrote that?
They can get it on Amazon. Christopher Vester, who's been on the show twice. If you're listening to this, you'll see him on the show, the Culture Matters podcast. He's been on twice. We've recorded 3 or 4, but you'll see at least 2 by the time this one comes out. Yeah, he's a solid human being and a brilliant person. And so he took the book, he read the thoughts, he wrote his thoughts, he shared his thoughts, and people got to see his thoughts of my thoughts. And my thoughts are thoughts based on other people's thoughts that I've read, and so on and so forth, right? And that's kind of the value of the book. The value of the book was think for yourself, share what you think with the world, and those that have done it or participated in it. Another person, Andrew Berman, who's been on the Culture Matters podcast, has talked splendidly about the book. Paul Lucido, who's been on the Culture Matters podcast. I've done a couple of years ago lives with him around the book. They did a review every week for months where they would take one of the excerpts and they would talk about it on their podcast. I've written, some of them are dedicated to some people in my life. I wrote some of them about people in my life that I've yet to, I'll have to tell them first before I ask permission to share it with people. But, Tyler Wagner, who we published it with, he said, we've talked about it on the Culture Matters podcast recently, I think episode 136, that whole process of putting it out there and what he thinks of it. And he thinks that it will be appreciated later in my career, later in my career. So a couple other books that are less abstract, less philosophical, less of a challenge, that are more digestible. People that like what we're about, that resonate with what we have to say, what I have to say, they'll likely gravitate towards that book. So he thinks it'll have legs in the future. That's kind of where we're at with it. But yeah, there's been scathing reviews, and there's been people that have actually written about it. 2 people have written about it.
Oh, Jay, this has been fascinating. You are an interesting interview, to say the least.
Well, I love doing this with you. I look forward to next time.
And for those of you who want to catch more of Jay, you can download Shrek on your computer. Jay, I want to close by saying, where can people find out more about you?
Here,
Culture Matters. But I mean, they want to find out more about you personally, because you're a really fascinating guy.
They can message me on Instagram, Jay the Culture Man, Jay Doran the Culture Man, or Facebook, Jay Doran, Doran.
I was just going to say spell Doran, because they'll spell it Some people spell it D-U-R-A-N.
Yeah,
It's D-O-R.
Jaydoran.
My friend, thank you so much for allowing me this privilege of interviewing you.
I appreciate you. You're the man. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon, buddy.